and welcome to another episode of Anfield Watch. Today we're going to be talking about Liverpool's poor run of form, how they turned that around, and how they can beat Manchester City as well. And to do that, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Ninad Barbadikar, a freelance football journalist who writes for the Premier League and the Bundesliga, among many other places as well. Ninad, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
It's great to be back, Ben. Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, look forward to today.
So, as I mentioned, I think I reached out to you a couple of weeks ago now to speak to you at the time. I wanted to speak to you about Liverpool's bad run of form. Now, obviously, we're talking at a much happier time now as a Liverpool fan. And Liverpool beat Aston Villa, beat Real Madrid, and it feels like that they've turned the corner from those bad results. I'm interested in particular about the Real Madrid game. What do you think were the tweaks that Slot made in those games that sort of helped Liverpool play better, be more compact, and ultimately feel like they're actually in control of the game? Obviously, it was similar to Aston Villa as well, but I think the pattern before that was Liverpool didn't really feel like they were in control in any of the other games. The results were close. Sometimes you could say they were unlucky even to lose. But against Real Madrid and against Aston Villa, it just felt like the result was never in doubt, even though the margin in terms of the final result was narrow in both games. Liverpool just seemed in a lot better control.
No, for sure. I think control is the big word, right? I think it's something that Arne Slot definitely talks a lot about and has talked about since he's come into Liverpool. And I think the big key point here is not just the goals, but also the clean sheets. Like Liverpool maintaining successive clean sheets. I think for the first time this season, if I'm not mistaken. And I think maybe the tweaks in defense are the place that we maybe need to start, because I think Arne Slot has probably realized that he needs to go back to basics. And I think this has also been a big talking point this week that, he's gone back to selecting Andrew Robertson at left back, and then he's been able to bring back Conor Bradley at right full back. And I think those two changes have given Liverpool a lot more familiarity and brought back the sort of solid foundations of a back four that know each other, and they know what Slot demands of them. And obviously, having players like Milos Kerkic and obviously Jeremy Frimpong still sort of making his way back from injury, I think maybe there's been a sort of underestimation of how much time you need really to sort of assimilate yourself into a team like Liverpool and the defense in particular. So I think being able to rely once again on Robertson and Bradley is a big plus for Slot, because he doesn't really need to worry about the sort of performances that you can expect from them. And I think, Bradley showcased that against Real Madrid, sort of keeping tabs on Vinicius all throughout the night. And I think that was sort of a big reason why whenever Real Madrid even showed a hint of danger, and there were a couple of moments to be fair, but largely Bradley kept him quiet and made the centre backs, Van Dijk and Konate's job a lot more easier in keeping tabs on Mbappe. So I think overall, those tweaks in defense have really helped. And then coming to the Madrid game in front of the defense, obviously then Wirtz's return to the starting 11 was maybe a sort of a talking point. And I think taking him out of these couple of games for a little bit of run, for the few run of games that he was out of the team, I think that was ultimately a good thing, because I think the talk was becoming a little bit too much about him. I think because the underlying numbers are still strong. He's still one of, I think, the leading chance creator in the team. It's only just that things aren't clicking. And then as a manager, obviously, then you have to make a decision. And then Slot obviously drops him for the Villa game, brings him back into the fold for the Madrid game. And then we see the benefits of having Wirtz in a position that is more akin to his strengths. Not necessarily playing him in the middle. Obviously, we had Szoboszlai occupying that role, but Wirtz starting from the left, which I think is probably a role that we will see him occupy more as time goes on during the season. And I know we sort of, the last time we chatted on here, we talked about Wirtz's perfect role in this team. And I think one of the cases was either he starts at 10 or he starts at left wing. And I think it's becoming more and more apparent now that with the forward configuration that's now available at Slot's disposal, Wirtz's best role is probably going to be that left wing slot. And and I think he's all the better for it, because then you don't have him sort of having a great deal of responsibility down the middle. He can still come inside from the left, and he can still affect pressing actions further up the pitch. And you want him to be further up the pitch. You want him to affect things in the final third, which is what he did. And I mean, I think Liverpool's first shot on the night, I think, came from McAllister, came from a sequence, a high recovery, or, a recovery in almost by Real Madrid's byline, from Dean Huijsen. It was Wirtz that won the ball back and then sort of kickstarted that whole sequence for McAllister's first shot. And there, I think you ultimately see Wirtz's immediate benefit from having him in the sort of final third configuration. He's very quick to press and very effective at it as well. So I think that sort of change in the sort of final front line really helped Liverpool in maintaining their high press very effectively, because that's what Saul wants to do. He wants to win the whole ball high up the pitch, wants to attack as directly as possible. And then I think having players like Wirtz and then Szoboszlai as well, coming back to him, he sort of brought a lot more balance to midfield. And I think obviously his performances at fullback earlier in the season were incredible, but having him in midfield now is almost indispensable to Liverpool because of the variety of strengths he brings to the team, and the balance as well. So all of those things, I think, just contributed to what you were talking about earlier, like how they maintain a compact shape against Real Madrid, and how they were able to not give their sort of backline any space to play through. And even if they did play through, the fullbacks were always there. Conor Bradley was there. Robertson was there to sort of win those duels up against their respective markers. And I think that ultimately made the difference. So yeah.
I think all of the things that you mentioned, I want to touch on. I think for me, observing the game and what was going wrong at Liverpool, I think if you're looking at the average positions of the players, the games that Liverpool lost, those 6 games, that bad run, they're kind of like everywhere almost, or a bit chaotic at times, the average positions. But right now in those 2 games, the average positions, it was a very compact and structured Liverpool side. And like you said, a lot of that comes from everyone understanding the system. But I do think there were a couple of tweaks. Like you mentioned, Wirtz was playing as a left winger. But to me, at times, it almost felt like Liverpool playing double tens with him and Szoboszlai, and Robertson was holding more of the width on the left, whereas Bradley was a lot more reserved and a lot more sort of held back and making more progressive passes from deep, and obviously sticking on Vinicius Jr. because that is a task in itself, which he did very well, by the way. But it almost seems like Slot has flipped a switch, because before he was asking Milos Kerkez to do this, stay back, play passes from deep, and personally I don't think that is Kerkez's strength. I think he is the guy to sort of hold the width, go bombing down those channels rather than staying back and making those long passes. I think Bradley actually worked a little bit better. He was trying at least to make long passes, and it seemed a little bit more effective. And on top of that, I think the other factor which we haven't mentioned is it sort of allowed Salah, Bradley holding back, allowed Salah to hold the width and actually have a lot of success in the areas that he's very good at still, which is the close control, beating defenders 1v1. I think I was reading a statistic that in the last year, he's only completed 5 dribbles once up until the Villa and Real Madrid games, in which he both completed 5 dribbles each. So I think going forward, this feels like almost the way to go for Liverpool right now.
No, for sure. I 100% agree with that. And I think going back to what we talked about in terms of Wirtz's strengths, I think starting from what you said about Wirtz and him having that sort of role to sort of dictate sort of across the pitch, across the front, and not just sticking at left wing. That was really pertinent because he had the freedom, and that freedom allowed him to be his best version, I think. And this was, I think, by far one of his best performances this season. So yeah, Wirtz in that sense from the left wing. He's not a traditional left winger, obviously, and then you have to have someone like Robertson who knows the role of what you need from a fullback in Slot's system. And I think Kirkish, maybe he needs a little bit more time. He needs more time on the training pitch, getting in tune to what the needs are of the system. And I think ultimately it probably is a good thing that Slot can rely on a healthy rotation between the two, because you can have Kirkish in games where there are spaces to be attacked and there is more overlapping to be done, which is something that he's excellent at. You want him bombing down the left, you want him attacking the box with crosses, and you want players in the box to attack those crosses. So when those spaces are not available in wide areas, you need someone like Wirtz to cut inside and make those spaces happen. The second thing, obviously, talking about Salah, I think him having the space to sort of isolate himself against Alvaro Carreras was really important for him to sort of obviously find his best rhythm again. And like you said, the kind of space that Bradley was occupying further down the pitch meant that, Liverpool, Real Madrid had to have Carreras deep as well, sitting on Salah. But Salah, being the player that he is, 9 times out of 10, he is going to get the better of his fullback. And I think he enjoyed that tussle against Carreras and came out the better of it for the majority. And I think this is a really positive sign. Like I said, it should be the blueprint for Slot going forward, in that, having Wirtz in these kind of games where there is not going to be so much space in the wider areas. There's not going to be enough space for someone like a Gakpo, for example, to be able to cut inside and then just take those shots. You need more creative impetus in the game, which is where having a sort of double 10 presence, like you said, of Szoboszlai and Wirtz is going to be extremely key. So absolutely, I think there's a lot of positives to take going forward, and the coming weeks will tell us more.
I think as well, we need to mention the sort of off the ball work as well that Wirtz and Szoboszlai put in together, and Hugo Ekitike on top of that, because he also covered a lot of ground and he's also constantly running and trying to create space for others when Liverpool are in possession, but also harassing defenders when the opponents are in possession. So I think that press seemed to work a lot better. But I do have a sort of caveat, because I know Arne Slot has bemoaned long balls all season, and throughout that particular bad run of form, he kept complaining about teams going long against Liverpool. Obviously, against Villa and against Real Madrid, we didn't see either side necessarily going long. They tried to play out from the back and almost played to Liverpool's strengths. But I also do wonder how much of that was down to Liverpool's press limiting their ability and working effectively to go long and winning the balls back, or is it simply Unai Emery and Xabi Alonso just sticking to their principles and not trying something else? It could have been both at the same time. That also means we won't find out how effective this Liverpool team is until they face another Brentford, another Crystal Palace, or one of those sides who are going to be a little bit more frustrating and who are just going to be a lot more direct.
No, for sure. I think it's a little bit of both, like you say. I think it's obviously Villa and Real Madrid, Emery and Alonso in particular, obviously being a little bit more naive in their approach. And I mean, listen, if these were losses for Liverpool, we'd be applauding them for sticking to their principles and whatnot. But interestingly enough, I think this is sort of becoming a trend this season. It's still early on, but I think I was looking at the sort of long passes and the games that Liverpool have faced the least amount of long passes against. There's been the Frankfurt game, Real Madrid, Burnley, Aston Villa, Newcastle. These are the games that Liverpool have faced the fewest long passes in, all of them victories for Liverpool. So I think there's something to take away from there in that, Liverpool are not a team that you necessarily can, get the better of with this kind of approach. So yeah, I think there's lessons to be taken from here. But yeah, like you said, I think we still need a little bit more of the season to go to properly understand how this kind of approach will sit against oppositions like the Brentfords, like Palace, and Everton again. I'm sure the Merseyside derby, the second one, will be a lot more feisty for sure. So yeah, I think time will tell more, but I think already you can see there's a trend there. So yeah, we'll see.
Now, it sort of leads me to the big game at the weekend, the biggest game, I think, in the Premier League, probably in European football as well, Liverpool versus Manchester City. We've seen City be a little bit more direct this season. Obviously, Pep Linders has come in, who at Liverpool was more in favour of the direct pressing and that kind of football, and kind of introduced changes when he worked with Jurgen Klopp. And we are seeing, obviously, I think City utilise one of the most traditional forwards in the Premier League, but also the one of the most unique forwards that I have, I think, ever seen in football in Erling Haaland. He just seems inevitable, unstoppable, and just indomitable. He is just an incredible player. How much do you think the games that have happened, the Aston Villa and Real Madrid game, is that going to influence Guardiola's decision making? And is he maybe going to look at Emery's and Alonso's approach and can say, well, I'm not going to try that. We've got someone in Erling Haaland who can run in behind defences, Omar Marmoush, who is extremely fast as well. Obviously, Cherki is in great form too. Do you think there's a possibility that City try the approach that the likes of Manchester United, Crystal Palace, Brentford have tried? Or do you think they will sort of stick to their principles, which is ultimately still the Guardiola principle of tiki-taka football, although this season it has gone a little bit more direct?
Yeah, it's hard to pin down. It's really, really hard to pin down because of the thing that you say, that Guardiola is sort of changing and adapting to the meta of what the Premier League is becoming. It's becoming a lot more direct. There's a lot more transitions. And fortunately for him, he has a striker that, molded himself in one of the best transition leagues. And I think, yeah, having someone like him really, really helps because, he's obviously trained Haaland and sort of molded him to be a lot more useful now in the possession style that he wants to incorporate. But now this season we're seeing that City are happy to go a little bit more direct against United. Obviously in the derby, they were happy to sort of cede possession and then let United test their luck against their defense. And I think that's the tricky bit, that City are really difficult to nail down this season in terms of what they want to do. So it would be a really, really difficult game for Liverpool, I think. For as good as they've been in these last two games, this City game will probably be an early ultimate test of what their title credentials are this season, because I think it's far too early to dismiss any kind of title talk for them, because Liverpool are still Liverpool. They have one of the best arsenals of attack. And obviously Arsenal being one of the other favorites for the title this season will be really interesting, because there's sort of two things going on there. Arsenal relying on their defense, and then Liverpool, I think, more leaning towards their attacking prowess to sort of guide them through games. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what Guardiola can come up with, because like you say, Cherki has found form this season. And I think striking up a really interesting partnership with Haaland. So you have Foden, you have Cherki, you have players like Doku, who are again finding a really good rhythm under Guardiola. So there's lots to think about there. But I do think it's probably in City's best interest to sort of go long and test the likes of Konate and Van Dijk time and again with Haaland's runs from deep, And he's someone who hates to be offside, and he's rarely offside, if ever. So I think it's going to be a long day for Van Dijk and Konate against City. We shall see how it goes.
Now, obviously, you write for the Premier League and you do a lot of match analysis. So you watch a lot of City's games. Where can Liverpool hurt this City side? Because they are not perfect. This is not the Pep Guardiola that was invincible and pretty much unbeatable at times. There are ways that Liverpool can cause problems to this Manchester City team.
Yeah, and I think that question ultimately comes back to the midfield, the question of sort of winning the midfield battle against City. I think Nico Gonzalez, as good as he's been, he has shown weaknesses in the middle. He's not quite the player that Rodri was, and it's not to say that he can't be, but I think there's definitely an area of weakness there that Liverpool can exploit. Having someone like Gravenberch, for example, I think his ability to carry against a press and sort of break opposition lines with his carrying is probably going to be really important for Liverpool if they want to sort of get through City lines in midfield and then obviously find Salah or Wirtz in spaces. So I think that's probably where I would imagine that Slot would think, there's an advantage to be had here. We have Szoboszlai, who is one of the most effective all-round midfielders in the Premier League. He can, sit on Gonzalez almost throughout the entire game and make life difficult for him. And then if you cut off supply lines from there, then you start to sort of deny City attackers service, and then that will hopefully be enough to sort of negate the number of opportunities that Haaland will get. And he will get opportunities, but it's just kind of finding a compromise in what you want to do as a team. Because I think as much as you do want to stop City from playing their way, I think Slot also wants to obviously, impress upon City their own kind of brand of football. So you don't want to think too much about what they will do and get lost in that as well. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think I do wonder if he sticks with Wirtz for this game, or if or decides to bring back Gakpo, because I think Wirtz showed a lot against Real Madrid. Will he have those same spaces against Man City? That is the question, because the Premier League is a much more different environment than Champions League games, where there tends to be more space, there tends to be a lot more openness and sort of in the way the games go. So yeah, I do think, I don't know, personally I would like to see Wirtz start, but again, it really comes down to how Slot sees the opportunities and sees where the weaknesses lie in this City team, because there's probably a good 1v1 battle there to be had with Matheus Nunes, who he's as good as he has been this season. I think if you can sort of press him and put more pressure on him deeper in City's own half, there are mistakes to be had from him as well. So I think, yeah, those two areas may be worth looking at for Liverpool. So the midfield and fullback, particularly in Nunes.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned being good in tight spaces and being effective in those areas, because I think as much as we talk about Liverpool being bad at defending long balls and being vulnerable in those situations, I think a lot of the reasons why Liverpool haven't found success and have struggled against those types of direct teams is because they sit quite deep, and Liverpool haven't necessarily found a way to unlock those deep lying defenses. They don't necessarily have, I think, the players that perhaps Manchester City or Arsenal do. In Arsenal have, for example, Eberechi Eze, who's very good on in those tight spaces. Jeremy Doku, you mentioned, is also someone who's very good for Manchester City. Liverpool don't necessarily have that player. Like, Salah has shown it in the last 2 games, but that's because he had space rather than, him being good in tight spaces. I think before, when he was a little bit younger, he was definitely better in that area of his game. But the statistic that sort of showed that he's only completed 5 dribbles once before these last two games is quite stark. And at the other end, Cody Gakpo isn't the type of player who sort of excels in those situations either. He's got many other strengths, but that's not one of his strengths. And I think for me, one of the most telling moments of the season was against Burnley, who sat back, defended very deep against Liverpool, and Arne Slot decided to throw, I think, Rio Engamo on for the last 10 minutes of the game. He's someone who is very excellent in those tight spaces, but he's only 17 years old, or he was barely 17 years old then. And he beat a couple of players, broke into the penalty area, squared it to Jeremy Frimpong, who probably should have scored. Goalkeeper saved it. Liverpool get a corner, and ultimately, from that chain of events, Liverpool ended up scoring and getting the winner. But those moments have been so rare against low defensive blocks, and it is something I think Liverpool are trying to address. One of the players who has been linked with Liverpool is Antoine Semenyo, who is in Europe and in the Premier League one of the best players when it comes to 1-versus-1 situations and take-ons. He leads the numbers, and I think he is someone who thrives in tight spaces because he's got such a strong body and a low center of gravity where he can change direction very quickly. And at the same time, he is ambidextrous. He can use both feet equally as comfortably, and those elements make him very good in those situations. So do you think perhaps that could be a move that could make Liverpool better? And I know a lot of fans will say, oh, well, Liverpool spent so much money in the summer, but ultimately they didn't necessarily replace Luis Diaz, who left. Rio Engamo stayed, but he's only 17 years old. He's very young, and it's a lot of pressure on someone's shoulders to replace someone as good as Luis Diaz. So do you think Semenyo, it could be an option for Liverpool in terms of unlocking that threat again?
Yes, I do. I think the easy answer there is absolutely yes, because like you say, Semenyo is I think grown to become one of the best wingers in the league. And I think that two-footedness is a really, really massive strength of his. And I think I wrote a little bit about him for the Premier League a while back. And looking at the numbers, I think after Heung-min Son, he's probably the most two-footed shooter in the Premier League's history. I think he's got a proportion of shots with his left and right that sort of almost matches up with, or maybe has even overtaken Son by now. So yes, I think he's a player who will walk into almost every Premier League team at the kind of trajectory that he's going. And for Liverpool, especially, like you said, there hasn't really been a natural replacement for Luis Diaz. And I think his form this season for Bayern obviously begs the question even more as to why Liverpool were, maybe the financials involved were sort of leaning them towards letting him go, but also then it becomes a lot more important to replace someone like him. So I think, Semenyo could absolutely be someone who can walk into this Liverpool team and make a difference in the final third. But then the question then becomes, where do you sort of put Wirtz into that entire equation? Because I don't know if he's ready for that number 10 spot. And so far, the evidence for that is that he's a lot better at left wing. So I think Wirtz's own development in Liverpool's system will also determine where they go with their left wing recruitment decision. Because I think Slot obviously has been happy to sort of attempt to play Ekitike there as well. And he's spoken about having Ekitike and Isak together in the system, which I think is the evidence for that working is weak so far at the very least, but we'll know more as the season goes on. So I think yes, Semenyo will improve Liverpool's attack for a variety of reasons, but the decision to go for him will ultimately be sort of defined by if you can find a configuration which allows Szoboszlai and Wirtz to still be in this Liverpool team and sort of be the kind of players that they are right now, where they're able to sort of bring a lot more balance to the front line and midfield, and then be their best versions of the players that they are. So I think, yeah, a lot to ponder for Liverpool's recruitment department before the summer.
Well, I think if they can figure out a system to put all of them together, one thing that we haven't mentioned about Semenyo is his ability and his work off the ball as well, which obviously we know how good Wirtz and Szoboszlai are at that. So if they can get those three playing together, I mean, Liverpool's press would be even stronger as a result. One thing that I might mention is, obviously we mentioned he is two-footed, Semenyo. He can play off the right as well. And naturally we know Mo Salah is not going to stay at Liverpool forever. When he went through this particularly bad period, there were even calls for him to leave in January, which is a bit ridiculous. But I think certainly come the summertime, it is a possibility that he could leave. And then if we're talking about replacing him, if Semenyo, continues his production and the way he is playing for the rest of the season, he could be an ideal sort of replacement. I mean, you're never going to replace Salah's output because he was world class. He was, I believe, one of the best players in the world in his prime, and in last season as well. He should have finished a lot higher up in the Ballon d'Or rankings. But Liverpool perhaps don't need to replace his output as much because they've already brought in, as you mentioned, Alexander Isak, Florian Wirtz, Hugo Ekitike, so you can kind of do the Moneyball thing and replace him on the aggregate. However, in terms of the playing style, Semenyo is definitely someone who suits that intensity, gives Liverpool strengths where they had weaknesses as well, and ultimately make the team better.
Fully agree with that. I think, I think having Semenyo in the team will probably, like you say, not necessarily bring Salah's output, but you don't need to. You already have players like you already mentioned, where Ekitike and Salah, and if those three can click and find a way of sort of bringing the best attacking output to the team, you don't need to worry about the output as such. The output will come with the system. You need to find the best players that fit what you want to do. So yeah, we'll see if Semenyo is that player for Liverpool, because I think what will also be a lot more of a determining factor for Liverpool is that they will need someone who's ready to attack Premier League immediately. So obviously having someone who's familiar with the Premier League landscape is a lot more helpful. And I think Manchester United's own recruitment also speaks about that, right? So because they went for Cunha, they went for Mbeumo, players who are Premier League ready, don't need time to adjust to the pace of the league, the intensity of the league. And I think obviously if Bryan Mbeumo was still available at Brentford, he would have probably been the ideal choice to replace Salah. Or maybe it would still be Semenyo. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where it eventually turns out to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting choice. I think I won't admit to being a fan of Mbeumo because he's gone to United now, but I might or may not have argued in favour of that in previous seasons before. Let's just leave it at that. But listen, Ninad, I think this has been a really fascinating conversation. I hope everyone who has listened has enjoyed it. If the listeners do want to find you and find your work and keep up with your insights, where can they do that?
Yeah, I think these days if my work does come up at the Premier League, you will find my work on the Premier League app and the website. But if not, I'm semi-active on X these days, but you can find me on Ninad _06. So yeah, happy to be here once again, Ben, and thank you so much for having me.
And you've also got an Instagram page as well, so we'll link that in as well.
Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, appreciate that. So it's Ninad B Talking Footy. Very clever Instagram username there. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Well, I definitely recommend everyone to check Ninad out. He's fantastic when it comes to his analysis. Like I said, I think his work speaks for itself. He works for the Premier League. He works for the Bundesliga. He writes for massive institutions. And it's you will learn more about the game if you follow him. So definitely recommend it. But for today, that's it from us. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much.